Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are opening up this massive dossier on the science of beer, and we are taking you straight into the deep end.
We really are.
Yeah, we're going to track the rigorous, hardcore biology of exactly how a pint affects your body and your brain, literally from the second you swallow it. But, and this is the wild part, we're also crossing over into this very unexpected realm. We are looking at Carl Jung's startling perspective on alcohol as a spiritual sickness.
Yeah, and honestly, the contract in the sources is what makes this so compelling.
Yeah.
Because we are looking at modern biochemical data, right? Tracking cellular mutations.
It's a really gritty physical stuff.
Exactly, side by side with century-old psychoanalytical theory. And the mission today is to synthesize these two worlds to help you understand not just what beer does to your cells, but, what it actually does to your sense of self.
So, okay, let's unpack this, because before we can even begin to talk about why a drink alters your personality, we really have to look at the physical mechanics.
The baseline biology.
Right. When you take that first sip of a cold beer, about 20% of the ethanol is absorbed directly through the stomach lining into your blood, and the rest moves into the small intestine. But the sources highlight that beer actually has a distinct speed advantage over wine or liquor.
Even at the same alcohol content.
Yeah, exactly, because of the carbonation.
Right. The carbon dioxide gas essentially acts as this, well, it's a pressurized delivery system.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It forces the liquid through the stomach and into the small intestine much faster. It's rushing the absorption process. And once that ethanol hits the bloodstream, it makes an absolute beeline for the liver.
So let's visualize the liver for a second. I used to picture it as this overwhelmed bouncer at a club.
That's a good way to look at it.
But after reading this dossier, it's more like a massive hazardous waste processing plant.
Oh, absolutely.
When ethanol shows up, the sirens go off. The facility treats ethanol as the ultimate priority toxin. The workers, they basically have to drop every single other job they're doing, put on their hazmat suits, and deal with this chemical spill.
And the processing of that spill, it happens in two distinct phases. First, the liver deploys this enzyme called alcohol dehydrogenase to convert the ethanol into a byproduct called acetaldehyde.
Acetaldehyde.
Right. And the severe problem here is that acetaldehyde is highly toxic. We're talking roughly 10 to 30 times more damaging to the body than the actual ethanol itself.
Wait, really? 30 times?
Up to 30 times, yeah. It actively binds to proteins and just tears up cellular structures. So the liver has to rapidly deploy a second enzyme, ALDH2, to convert that dangerous acetaldehyde into acetate and eventually into, harmless carbon dioxide and water.
Which perfectly explains the genetics behind the so-called Asian flush. The sources note that about 50% of people of East Asian descent carry a slower, less efficient variant of that second enzyme, ALDH2.
Right.
So to use our hazmat analogy, the first team is converting ethanol into the highly toxic acetaldehyde at normal speed. But the second team, they're working at half speed.
Exactly. So you get this massive toxic bottleneck.
Yep.
And that bottleneck causes a rapid buildup of acetaldehyde in the tissues. So the flushing, the sudden nausea, the racing heart, it isn't just a cosmetic reaction. It is literally the body sounding the alarm because a severe toxin is actively pooling in the system.
That is wild. But
Yeah.
even if your enzymes are perfectly balanced, dealing with this toxin completely shuts down the liver's normal day job.
It drops everything.
Yeah. The dossier explains that the liver requires a specific molecule called NAD+ to process the alcohol. Think of NAD+ as like the battery packs the liver cells need to function.
Right.
The liver just burns through all its NAD+ just to neutralize the poison, converting it into this depleted form called NADH.
Right.
And the trade-off is huge. It completely halts a process called gluconeogenesis.
Right. And gluconeogenesis is basically how your liver maintains your baseline blood sugar.
Okay.
So when that system is taken offline because the liver is hoarding all the NAD+ batteries for the alcohol, your blood sugar crashes.
Oh, so that is the biological driver behind that intense late-night craving for greasy food after drinking.
That's exactly it. Your blood sugar is tanking. Furthermore, the lack of NAD+ also shuts down fatty acid oxidation.
Meaning, if the liver's workers are completely consumed by the hazmat spill, the regular packages, like the dinner you ate a few hours ago, they just sit on the loading dock untouched.
Completely untouched.
Right.
And in biological terms, that loading dock is your adipose tissue. Your body just stops burning fat for energy.
It just stores
It
it.
stores whatever you ate directly as fat. That mechanism is the literal origin of the beer belly. You are forcing your body to stockpile calories while the liver is over there fighting a chemical fire.
Wow.
Additionally, this whole metabolic traffic jam leads to a buildup of lactic acid, which causes the muscle fatigue and, those beer cramps you might feel the next morning.
Right. And, we have to talk about the beer itself, too, because it's not just a clean shot of ethanol in a vacuum.
Far from it.
The sources literally call beer liquid bread with a drug. You are consuming a significant volume, often 12 to 16 ounces per drink. And it's loaded with carbs from maltose that spike your blood glucose. But the ingredients themselves bring their own physiological baggage, like hops.
Yes, the hops.
I had no idea hops contain phytoestrogens.
Yeah, so phytoestrogens are these plant-based compounds that happen to weakly mimic human estrogen.
Which sounds a bit concerning.
Well, they aren't powerful enough to completely rewrite your endocrine system, but they do bind to estrogen receptors in the body. So you're introducing an entirely separate hormonal variable into the mix. And then, of course, you have the purines, which come from the brewer's yeast.
Oh, the purine breakdown blew my mind. When the body breaks down purines, it produces uric acid. If too much uric acid builds up, it crystallizes in the joints, which is the direct cause of gout.
Exactly.
And on top of that, you have congeners. These are the complex impurities and byproducts created during the fermentation process. Things like trace amounts of methanol or acetone.
Yeah, not stuff you want.
And the darker the beer, the more congeners it generally has. The sources point to these impurities as a major amplifier for hangovers.
But beyond the hangover, we have to examine the long-term systemic cost of that acetaldehyde exposure we discussed earlier. Because what's fascinating here is that when acetaldehyde circulates, it forms what are called DNA adducts.
Okay, what exactly is an adduct?
Well, think of your DNA strand like a zipper, right?
Right.
An adduct is a foreign molecule that wedges itself into the teeth of that zipper. So when your cell divides and tries to unzip and copy the DNA, it hits that wedge debris, it stutters, and it makes a biological typo.
A typo?
Yes, and that typo is a mutation. This is the primary mechanical reason alcohol is classified as a group 1 carcinogen.
Wait, let me stop you there, because this is where the dossier really throws a massive wrench into mainstream conventional wisdom.
It really does.
For decades, the public has been told about the protective J-curve. The idea that heavy drinking is bad, zero drinking is neutral, but one drink a day, especially a beer or red wine, is actively good for your heart. These new large-scale studies completely dismantle that, don't they?
They absolutely dismantle it.
Okay.
The scientific consensus has experienced a dramatic course correction. The 2022 Global Burden of Disease study, which culminated in the World Health Organization's definitive statement in 2023, they concluded unequivocally that there is no safe amount of alcohol that does not affect health.
No safe amount.
Yeah. Zero. The protective J-curve has essentially been debunked by better data control. A 2023 meta-analysis in The Lancet tracking 600,000 people found a linear risk model. One drink a day increases your risk of alcohol-attributable diseases by 0.5%.
Just from one?
Yeah. 2 drinks increase the risk by 7%. 5 drinks push it to 37%.
And regarding that old heart health myth, the mechanism makes total sense once you look at the gut. Because ethanol acts as a solvent. It physically degrades the tight junctions, the microscopic mortar holding the bricks of your intestinal lining together.
Right.
When that mortar dissolves, you get a leaky gut. The dossier specifically mentions LPS, or lipopolysaccharides.
Right, the bacterial fragment.
Exactly. They are structural fragments of bacteria living in your intestines. When the gut leaks, these bacterial fragments spill directly into the bloodstream.
And the immune system detects those bacterial fragments floating in the blood and immediately triggers a massive systemic inflammatory response.
It panics.
Total panic. Chronic systemic inflammation is a primary driver of heart disease and metabolic syndrome. Any minor vascular benefit you might hypothetically get from a drink is entirely eclipsed by the immune panic and the cancer risk.
So we've established the physical toll. The liver drops everything, the blood sugar crashes, the gut leaks bacterial fragments, and the DNA takes structural damage. But because the liver can only process roughly 1 drink per hour, the unmetabolized ethanol stays in the blood and eventually crosses the blood-brain barrier.
That's right.
And here's where it gets really interesting, because this biochemical hijacking is the exact mechanism behind the behavioral shift we call being drunk.
Yeah, the first target of circulating ethanol is the prefrontal cortex. This is the highly evolved region of your brain responsible for executive function, impulse control, and maintaining your social filter. Ethanol is a central nervous system depressant, and it essentially unplugs the prefrontal cortex first.
So chemically speaking, drunk you is just sober you without a PR team to filter your thoughts before you speak.
That's a perfect way to put it. The ethanol does not synthesize a new personality. It selectively disables the brakes that keep your existing underlying impulses in check. And simultaneously, it actively manipulates your neurotransmitters. It mimics GABA, which is the brain's primary inhibitory chemical, which is why you feel that initial wave of physical sedation and calm.
The buzz.
Yeah, the buzz. It also forces a spike in dopamine, creating a powerful artificial sense of reward and confidence.
But the real sabotage happens with the glutamate, right?
Absolutely.
Glutamate is the chemical ink your brain uses to write new memories and learn new information. Alcohol violently blocks the glutamate receptors. That is the specific mechanism behind making terrible decisions you wouldn't normally make, and it's exactly why heavy drinking leads to blackouts. Your brain simply stops recording the tape.
It just stops hitting record.
Yeah. And I'll take the lead on the sleep data here because this part completely shifted my perspective. A lot of people use a beer to wind down, but alcohol ruins sleep architecture.
It really does.
It increases adenosine, which is the chemical that builds up as sleep pressure. It makes you feel heavily drowsy, but it chemically suppresses REM sleep. So your brain is sedated, but it's not actually resting or repairing.
You're just unconscious.
Right. And when the alcohol finally metabolizes out of your system halfway through the night, your brain experiences this harsh rebound effect. That is the exact physiological reason you wake up staring at the ceiling, heart racing at 3 a.m.
And the long-term compounding of this chemical rewiring is profound. A 2022 study in Nature Communications demonstrated that moderate drinking is associated with brain volume loss. It effectively shrinks the brain by about 1.6% per decade.
Shrinks it? That is terrifying.
Yeah, the hippocampus, your memory center, takes the heaviest structural damage. Furthermore, because your brain is constantly trying to counterregulate the artificial spikes of dopamine and GABA, your baseline sober levels of anxiety and depression actually increase.
Wow.
Over time, your emotional spectrum blunts, and the brain's reward pathways are subtly rewritten to prioritize the easy dopamine of alcohol over relationships, challenging work, or deeply held values.
And that concept forces us to ask a really heavy question. If a chemical rewires your brain's reward center and permanently shifts your baseline anxiety, who is the real you?
Exactly.
Is it the anxious, sober person white-knuckling through the week, or the loud, confident person at the bar on Friday night? And that question brings us perfectly to the psychological half of this deep dive. Because if alcohol removes the prefrontal cortex's filter, what exactly is leaking out of the human psyche?
It's a fascinating transition.
Carl Jung looked at these behaviors, the unfiltered, unmanaged traits spilling out, and viewed them not just as biological errors, but as crucial psychological data.
Yeah, and Jung's influence on how we understand addiction is massive. In 1961, Bill Wilson, the co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, wrote to Jung to thank him for his early influence on the movement. And Jung's reply contained this famous Latin phrase, spiritus contra spiritum.
Spirit against spirit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, he believed that people use spirits alcohol to combat a profound spiritual thirst. Jung viewed alcoholism not merely as a biological disease or a moral failure, but as a spiritual sickness.
He argued that people drink to fill an existential void. They are desperate for a sense of wholeness, meaning, or connection, and they just settle for the synthetic mimicry of a chemical buzz.
Right. And Jung framed this using his concept of the shadow. The shadow contains all the repressed, unacknowledged, or socially unacceptable parts of the unconscious mind.
The stuff we hide.
Yeah, exactly. Because alcohol lowers the psychological barrier, it gives the shadow free rein. When people drink, they aren't becoming someone else. They are acting out their buried grief, their hidden rage, their suppressed lust, or even a suffocated sense of playfulness that they just don't allow themselves to feel when they're sober.
The tragedy of the cycle, according to Jung, is that you get to experience your shadow, but you don't integrate it. You let it out, you make a scene, you wake up the next morning feeling mortified, you shove that part of yourself back into the dark basement of your mind, and then you just repeat the exact same chemical release valve the next weekend.
Yeah. The sources highlight the story of Roland Hazard, an early patient of Jung's who later heavily influenced the founding of AA. Jung told Hazard his case was medically and psychiatrically hopeless.
Just completely hopeless.
Yes. He stated that a person so deeply trapped by the complex could only be cured by a vital spiritual experience. A numinous experience, finding profound purpose and intense connection to the self, or a deeply bonded community that was the only force powerful enough to displace the grip of the addiction.
Jung wasn't a Puritan, right? He wasn't anti-pleasure.
No, not at all. He was deeply against using chemicals to artificially bypass the difficult, necessary work of becoming a whole, integrated human being.
Okay, wait, let me push back on this for a second, putting on my skeptic's hat.
Sure, go for it.
We just spent 10 minutes detailing how ethanol literally degrades the prefrontal cortex, mimics GABA, and rewires dopamine pathways. Given the hard physical neuroscience, isn't calling a drinking habit a spiritual thirst just poetic framing for a biological addiction? Aren't we just romanticizing a broken dopamine receptor?
It's a fair question, but the Jungian framework doesn't deny the biology. It provides the context for it. Biology explains the mechanics of the trap. The GABA mimicry, the dopamine spikes, the genetic bottlenecks, that is exactly how the addiction functions on a cellular level.
Right.
But Jung's psychology explains why the ego willingly walks into that trap in the first place. Why does an individual feel so overwhelmed, so hollow, or so disconnected that they knowingly initiate a toxic biological cascade just to feel relief?
Oh, I see.
The biology is the vehicle, but the spiritual hunger is the driver.
That makes perfect sense. The chemistry is just the tool being used by a psyche in distress.
Yeah.
So what does this all mean practically? If drunk you is actually an unedited data dump from your unconscious shadow, how can a listener access and understand this data without relying on the ethanol to rip the filter off?
Well, Jung's ultimate goal was individuation, the lifelong process of bringing the unconscious into consciousness to become a whole person. His framework for moderation wasn't built on rigid moralistic rules. Instead, he posed this diagnostic question: are you free to not drink?
Wow! That is an incredibly confronting mirror to hold up to yourself.
It really is. If the thought of skipping your evening beer for 30 days fills you with anxiety, irritability, or obsessive thoughts, then you don't have the habit. The psychological complex has you. Jung distinguished between sacred use drinking, that is contained, conscious, and communal and profane use, which is solitary, automatic, and used as an anesthetic against daily life.
And the dossier offers a fantastic practical exercise to map this out called Identifying Your Beer Archetypes. It asks you to observe exactly who takes the wheel when you drink.
Yes, I love this part.
Like, do you become the jester? The person who is a rigid, stoic accountant from 9 to 5 but wears a lampshade on their head after 3 beers because they completely repress their natural playfulness?
Right.
Or do you become the lover, acting overly intimate or flirty because your sober life lacks genuine emotional connection?
Or consider the berserker.
Yeah.
This is the person who is a perpetual people pleaser at work, unable to set boundaries, who suddenly picks vicious fights at the bar because their repressed anger finally demands an outlet.
Yeah.
Then there is the melancholic, who ends up crying in the corner over a decade-old breakup because they refuse to process grief in the daylight. Or the philosopher, who corners people at 2 a.m. for deeply intense conversations about the universe because their day-to-day routine is utterly devoid of meaning.
It's so recognizable.
In Jungian psychology, none of these archetypes are inherently bad. They're vital, unlived parts of the psyche desperately demanding airtime.
And the beer simply breaks the dam holding them back. So to interact with these archetypes without the toxin, the sources recommend a technique called active imagination.
Yes.
You sit down completely sober, maybe with a journal, and you consciously initiate a dialogue with the specific urge that wants the drink. It sounds a bit strange to talk to yourself, but you literally ask the craving, what are you trying to protect me from right now? What do you actually want?
It is a visualization technique designed to separate your conscious ego from the unconscious urge. And the answers it yields can be startling. You might realize the craving isn't for the taste of hops.
Right.
The internal voice might say, I'm terrified of social rejection, and I need liquid courage to survive this party. Or, I am completely exhausted from being the responsible parent all day, and I need an off switch. Once you uncover the true demand of the shadow, you can ritualize the transition.
Meaning, if cracking open a beer at 6 p.m. is your brain's official permission slip to stop working and relax, you have to create a sober ritual to replace it.
Exactly.
You walk through the door, immediately change out of your work clothes, light a specific candle, or take a 10-minute walk outside. You give the psyche the clear, definitive transition it is crying out for, but you deliver it without the carcinogenic biological cascade.
This shifts the entire paradigm. The 30-day experiment recommended in the sources isn't just about giving your liver a break. It asks you to completely abstain from alcohol for 30 days and intensely observe the emotions that rush in to fill the vacuum.
Yeah, do you feel crushing boredom, intense social anxiety, simmering rage?
Whatever emotion surfaces in that silence is the exact psychological material you need to confront. That emotion is what the beer was successfully medicating.
I find that perspective incredibly empowering for you, the listener. It reframes a craving. Instead of viewing the urge to drink as a shameful moral failure or a lack of willpower, you can view it as a loud, urgent SOS from an ignored part of your own mind.
And this raises an important question, the ultimate question of the dossier, really. What genuine spirit is absent from your life? Is it a profound connection to the natural world? Is it a supportive community? Is it deeply fulfilling creative work?
Because if you are missing these foundational human experiences, the psyche will attempt to replace them with a beverage.
Exactly.
We have covered immense territory today. We started by tracking the physical journey of a pint. The rapid absorption, the liver deploying hazmat enzymes to neutralize toxic acetaldehyde, the gut-leaking bacterial fragments that trigger systemic inflammation, and the DNA suffering mutational damage.
A lot of physical damage.
Yeah. Then we looked at how ethanol chemically disables the prefrontal cortex and rewires the brain's reward centers by manipulating dopamine, GABA, and glutamate. And finally, we explored Carl Jung's profound insight that this destructive biological cascade is so often a misguided, desperate attempt to fulfill a deep spiritual thirst.
Jung reminded us that human beings are deeply complex systems. He famously wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." If the archetypes that emerge when you drink, the repressed jester, the hidden philosopher, the buried lover, are actually unlived parts of your true self begging for daylight, imagine what would happen if you actively invited them into your daily, sober life.
What incredible untapped parts of your own potential are currently trapped behind the requirement of a 5% ABV beverage? It really brings us full circle. We desperately want our biological choices to be clean and simple, but a pint of beer holds up a murky, deeply complicated mirror to both our physical health and our psychological depths. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the things you consume, keep exploring what's hidden in the shadows, and keep seeking the real spiritus.